Hello, English 233 students. Dr. Everton out here in the Pines. It's Thursday, July 27th, about 3 p.m. I've been working on our lesson for today, and I did ask everybody's patience as I wanted to post a few more things in today's lesson to make hopefully our last week together a little bit more efficient and help you all out as well as your instructor. So I'm putting this video together to make sure that as we encounter the final week of our course, that we're all on the same page. So let me go ahead and share screen. I'm going to go into our course site, and here you see our reading schedule. You guys are probably tired of me going over this, but we are near the end. How exciting, right? So we've entered officially into our last unit, the unit that's focused on a novel, which is how I traditionally finish my English 233 course. I have to say, in the fall of last year, we did the novel early so that we could have the author, Janice Agee, on campus, and she zoomed in and did a bunch of things with our class. So occasionally we'll have the novel in the middle, but I always like it at the end because it allows us, particularly in the genre of fiction and narrative, which most students are most interested in, it allows us to sort of incorporate all the things we've learned over the course of the semester into that one final genre. So we'll talk a little bit more about the novel here in a moment and about Willa Cather in this particular novel, but we also want to talk about finishing up our course. So I've made a few slight alterations to our schedule. It's very important that you are aware of this, that today we're starting lesson 14, and in the past I've kind of had lesson 14 A and B, lesson 14 continued. I decided to go ahead and call our next lesson on Monday, which technically will be our final lesson, lesson 15, just to alleviate some confusion. But you really want to think about this final lesson, this final unit, as kind of one thing. We really just want to read the novel, and we want to sort of discuss it as a class. And so I am aware, though, that we have a lot on our plates, and so I tried to divide up the tasks a little bit. But with what I'm going to share with you today, you should technically be able to finish out the rest of the course based upon everything that's posted so far. I do not have the link for the final exam posted yet. We'll talk more about that on Monday, but otherwise you should be able to be completing as much of this material now as we come to the final week of the course. So you'll notice that we finish up then on Monday, a continuation of A Lost Lady, basically just continue the discussion. I'm asking you to read it, whatever version of the novel you have. I'm working from the scholarly edition, but the Willa Cather archive at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln has a wonderful, this is a wonderful scholarly edition because it has so much information about the historical context of the novel. I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but I'm asking you to read through a rather lengthy historical essay that I think you're going to find just very fascinating. Now, there's a question about whether you want to read this essay at the beginning of the novel or at the end of the novel. I kind of go back and forth on that. My scholarly approach is a new historicist or a cultural studies approach. So I typically am very interested in the context of the novel. With this novel, I read the full novel first. Mostly with Willa Cather novels, I kind of know what's going on. Because I've been to several Willa Cather conferences, I had a general background understanding of the novel as well. But I chose to hold off on the historical essay until I finished the novel. I didn't want it to sort of influence the way I might look at it stand alone as a work of literature or work of art. You can make your decision on that, but I do want everybody, before we leave the course this summer, at the end of this novel unit, I do want you to take some time and focus on this historical context. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail here when we go over the novel resources. So be aware of that, budget some time for that on Monday. But technically, today, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week is all focused on this novel and finishing it up. You have lots of space to get this done. It's not a very long novel. It is about, in my edition, it is 100 pages for the first part. And notice how these scholarly editions, they try to replicate the very wide margins of a paperback. So it's a very quick read. Hopefully you've already gotten through the majority of the novel, but it's a very quick read. And so the first part is about 100 pages and across 10 chapters. And then the second part, it's much shorter. It's about 60 pages across 10 chapters as well. You'll find that the narrative moves pretty quickly. I do have to say it involves marital affairs and rather salacious stuff that might shock you. There's nothing very very graphic in the novel at all, but in some ways, by not showing us what's going on behind closed doors, Cather makes it an even sexier novel and an even more shocking novel in some ways. So I'll be interested in seeing how you all respond to the novel in some of the assignments that I posted for today. So we're going to have a forum activity on this novel. I'll go over that in just a second, and that will carry you again through to Monday. And if you want to go ahead and complete the entire thing, let's say you've read the novel, you want to clear out your space for next week, go right ahead. You can post to that novel. It's the only to that forum. It's the only assignment we really have. You will have to wait for some of your classmates to post their questions, but otherwise you can complete most of that novel, most of that exercise on your own. Then you'll notice that on Thursday of next week, a week from today, we have our final. Part of that final, as we've already discussed, is the annotated bibliography, which will be due by midnight on Thursday. And then the final exam, I will go into more detail about this in our lesson notes on Monday. But the final exam, based upon what we did last summer, it's comprehensive. It's worth 200 points. By comprehensive, I mean it covers everything we've read all semester. You can bet there will be a question on everything on our reading list on this exam. The exam is mostly in these multiple choice, multiple answer questions. There's going to probably be about 50 of those. They're going to be worth about 3 points each because the overall exam is worth 200 points. The remaining 50 points of the exam will be made up either from some short story or some short essay or short answer type responses like you've been doing all semester in the other quizzes, or in a matching question or something like that. It will have it will have some sort of ratio like that. But the bulk of the exam is you click a button for your answer and it's scored automatically. And you should be aware that you will have 4 hours to complete this exam. If you've been reading everything all semester and you're well prepared and you've been taking notes, it should not take you 4 hours, but that's how long you have. Once you start the exam, you cannot return to the exam until you finish it. So make sure you set aside 4 hours sometime in that 48-hour period to complete the exam. Again, I'll go into more detail about the types of questions, and I'll actually have the exam link ready and all that sort of stuff. The exam, just to make sure that we're not having any situation where people are cheating or spending more time outside the exam on sites that they shouldn't be. Again, I'll go into this more detail on Monday, but just to make sure that that's happening, I do constrain the amount of time that the exam is open for 48 hours. It will be posted at noon on Thursday, and you will have until noon on Saturday to either complete the exam or at least begin the exam. And then after that point, anything will be it will be submitted, it'll be posted late. And because we have to turn in grades on Monday, I believe that's the 7th, I can't give you extensions. I can't do much of anything to help you out in that regard. We're in our final week. Quite a few of you have some missing items in the class. We've got to get all this wrapped up in the next week. We just are running out of time. So if you're running into those issues, you need to reach out to me. And I've certainly been reaching out to some students who have been having quite a few missing items. Main thing here is we want to make sure that everybody who's actively engaged in the course is able to finish successfully. None of you should be failing this course. If you're worried about it, if you're concerned about your points or whatever, you need to reach out to me as soon as possible. I have this wasp or this bee that's coming after me. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we're doing in this final unit on the novel. So I'm going to go to modules, and I'm going to click on today's lesson. And you'll notice that what I want you to just remind you, we're going to read the novel, we're going to read the historical background, and there's a reason for this, and I'll explain that in a moment here. And you're going to do a final discussion forum activity on the novel. And that's it for the reading for the course. The remaining items you have left to do are the annotated bibliography and the final exam. So let's talk a little bit about the novel. So you should be able to see lesson 14 published in unit 6 of the novel. And there's also a link to a document. I always give my students some background on the novel itself as a genre, and some background on this particular novel and this particular author. So if we go into the lesson, what you're going to see is basically an overview of everything I just explained to you. I want to give you an update on the review notes here. The review notes for Unit 4, which dealt with race, class, and gender, have been updated. I put together some new videos. You may notice I've been trying out some different video tools here. I've been working with the Teaching and Learning Center here at Shatter State College to see if we can get some more dynamic screen cast and things like that. And so we've been working on some of these tools. And so I reworked a couple of the video responses, and they went long like they always do. So I apologize for that. But I really would encourage you to take a look at those videos. Some of them are new, and some of them are just recordings from classroom sessions where we've had students interacting and discussing these poems and these stories. And I think particularly when they're dealing with these sensitive issues, I mean, I think of A Party Down at the Square. That's a traumatizing story to read. So I hope you all will take time to, for sure, take a look at the Unit 4 review notes. I tried to include some videos of previous class meetings and some new ones that I think kind of help us. See, now I'm seeing some errors here with the YouTube videos. Always learning something new. And I think the lesson on lynching and literature and all that's very important. So make sure you go back and look at those review notes. And keep in mind that these can be helpful for you when you're getting ready to prepare for the final exam. I also responded to the forums and updated the grades on those assignments for the most part. A couple of people have been late getting a few things submitted, so I may have missed a few things, but I've tried to get all the grades updated on those things. And so if you see a place where you're missing points, let me know. If you see a place where you have lost some points and you're not sure why, please click on the grade book, look at my explanation. I put some detailed responses to the poems, the one about Incident and Ballad of Birmingham, and I didn't make a video for that, but I put some detailed comments in the forum. So make sure that you're reviewing those items as we move forward towards this final exam. The other thing is that brings us to the assignments for today. You'll want to make sure you're continuing to work on your annotated bibliography and research report. Again, that's due at the end of next week on Thursday. You need to submit that. That's kind of part of our final part of the class. This was introduced a week ago, so you should have been able to do some research. Please don't wait till the last minute on this. It's going to be uncomfortable for the next week or so, but if you stick with it, we will soon be done, and you will have finished completing English 233 and probably fulfilling your SLO number 7 general education requirements in 8 weeks, and half the time that you would normally have to do it in a classroom, and you never even had to leave your home for the summer. Isn't that amazing? So stick with it. Communicate with me if you're having problems. But also be aware we are at the deadline. So we have to submit grades in basically a week and a half. So make sure that you're in communication with me as soon as possible. If we need to make some adjustments or whatever, as far as some items you might want to turn in, we're running out of time. So you've got to reach out to me and be on top of that as soon as possible. Okay, let's transition to our discussion about the novel. So in your lesson notes today, in your lesson today, you'll notice if we move and transition into discussing the novel, there's two components to this. First of all, we have the assignment that you're going to be doing, which is a discussion forum, which I'm going to go over here in just a second. Before you do your discussion forum, I would ask you to please review this mini lesson. So the mini lesson is going to tell you, first of all, what a novel is. You may feel like you really know what a novel is, and you know, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? It's just a long work of fiction, is it not? But this is the definition from your textbook. Novel: an extended prose narrative or work of prose fiction, usually published alone. Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter is a fairly short novel. Herman Melville's Moby Dick or The Whale is a very long one. The length of the novel enables its author to develop characters, plot, and settings in greater detail than a short story writer can. Though Ralph Ellison's story Battle Royale is printed as a standalone story in this anthology, it is taken from his novel Invisible Man. A novella, on the other hand, is a work of prose fiction that falls between the short story and the novel in size and complexity. Sometimes it's called a long short story. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis is a novella. You're going to learn, if you go through these resources, that A Lost Lady was originally serialized in the Century magazine, or was in Harper's, where it was published in 3 parts. And so, you know, it's a fine line between a novella and a novel. But there are certain key features and characteristics of a novel that we want to pay some attention to. In addition to length, there's a lot of attention that's given to the development of usually a primary character or protagonist. All the characters can be developed more fully. The setting can be developed more fully. You can obviously cover a lot more time without it feeling like it's rushed. So there's a lot of key characteristics and traits of the novel that you want to be aware of. There's this handout that I share from a handbook that has a really nice, from the Harman and Holman literature handbook of literature, has a really nice overview or discussion of what a novel is. And it gives you some historical background. You know, what was the first novel? Was it Don Quixote or something earlier than that? You know, the European traditions of the novel, how novels sort of began usually as collections of letters and epistolary sort of novels. So there's a good background on that. And this is the sort of thing that's going to be on the final exam. So make sure you're aware of this. And then the other components that are in this mini lesson on the novel have to do with Willa Cather. Now, we've encountered Willa Cather previously when we read Paul's Case. But now, so we should be familiar with who Cather is. And when we read Paul's Case, I had you read the short biography of Cather on the Cather Archive. Now, the Cather Archive is a scholarly site at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I want to tell you that I know some of the archivists there at UNL. In fact, one of them was Emily Rao, was at our presentation in New York City a few weeks ago at the Cather conference. And then I ran into Emily again in Portland just a week or two ago at the ASLE conference. And she's one of the librarians at UNL that's in charge of these digital archives. UNL has kind of become a very prominent place for digital humanities. They have 2 major archives right now that are widely used and admired: the Cather Archive and the Walt Whitman Archive. They also have an archive that they're working on John G. Neihart. And we're excited to announce from the Sandoz Society that they've put the domain up, and we have the start of our own archive for Mari Sandoz. One of the board members is from the UNL Digital Humanities and Library staff as well. So that's a really exciting thing. And these archives are very important. And so what you can do on the archives is you can look up all of the Willa Cather letters that we know are in existence. They might relate to this. Now, I'm not telling you to do this. I'm just telling you the wonderful resources that are available here. And there's a lot of background information on all of her writings. And then they set up these pages on specific works. So A Lost Lady has its own resource page. Here, we're in the Willa Cather Archive. You can see an image of the original first edition. You have the serialized editions in Century, and then here is the scholarly edition. So this is exactly the same as the book I'm working through. It's just a digital version of it. And I'm asking you to go through, and in particular, while you're reading through the novel, if you have the Penguin Random House version that was on our syllabus, the cheap version, less than $10 or whatever, the trade paperback, it probably doesn't have a lot of footnotes. I don't have that edition, so I don't know for sure. But footnotes generally occur at the end of a chapter or at the end of a publication, and for an important author, an important work where there's some historical context, and we might be reading the book more from a literary standpoint, such endnotes and supplementary materials can be very beneficial. So I would say, as you're reading through the novel, if you haven't already, go to this scholarly edition and start taking a look at the endnotes. It'll be very useful for you. Here at the end, we have, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble getting to the explanatory notes. That's what it's called. So the explanatory notes go through each chapter, and there's probably about 9 or 10 notes for each chapter. So if you're confused by anything, because it's an older narrative and all that sort of stuff, and also it provides some nice context. Now, I do think there are 2 ways of thinking about this. I've already mentioned this. Some people don't want their novel spoiled by history or a background on the author. They want to consume it as a work of art, a standalone work of art. That's great. I teach regional studies at Chadron State College, and I think that the context of the novel is particularly important for students like you who are attending this college that is based in, western rural Nebraska. What Cather is engaging in this novel relates to our lives living or going to school here, at least in this part of the state. Now, the novel is set in a more eastern location, a more green, a more fertile, more like Kansas, to be honest, the Republican River Valley area of the state. If you look up Red Cloud on a map, you'll get a sense of where that is. Much different than where we live in Chadron. And you can sort of compare and contrast the writings of Mari Sandoz and Willa Cather. They're interesting comparisons. Sandoz is quite a bit later than Cather and not anywhere near the artist, but they're writing about the same issues about what we would call homesteading. I might use the term settler colonialism. We want to keep some attention, and Cather doesn't really relate to this very much at all. There's a few points in the novel where she actually has some points that are a little bit contentious in this regard to the original inhabitants of that valley. The historical essay will offer a little bit of background, and some of the background notes will help as well. But we do know that there were indigenous people living in the Red Cloud area, and then of course they got supplanted by the settlers who came in sort of a colonial venture and took over the land. And it's part of our state history. It's part of the history of many of my students. We can trace back our ancestors to when they quote unquote settled the land. I always like to use the word resettled because it's moving people around. There were people here, and there were households, and there were people making a living in this area. And particularly in the Republican River Valley, there were people making a living there for millennia, right? So we want to pay some attention to that. But the explanatory notes will be very helpful as you're reading through the book. I mean, they're keyed to pages here, or if you're using the scholarly edition, they're highlighted and you could just link on it. It's just a wonderful resource. So that's going to provide background information, who the characters are sort of modeled on, and things like that. If you don't want to ruin the narrative by getting too much into the biographical details, some of the notes are simply explaining vocabulary, maybe archaic words in the narrative. I think it will be very useful for you to have this, and you will have a much more informed reading if you at some point go over all these notes. Okay. The other thing is then for particularly for the second part of the book, part 2, and the readings assigned for Monday, I've asked you to come into this archive and read through this historical essay. The historical essay, again, is going to sort of ruin everything for you, maybe if you read it first, but it's going to show you how much of this book was based upon elements of Webster County, elements of Red Cloud, elements of Cather's own background. Some of it quite controversial, by the way. So it is a long essay, but I hope that it's fascinating to you. It keys into this notion of literary scholarship that we've talked about. It is my sort of technique to work a lot from historical context when I'm looking at authors, and I find it fascinating. And from a regional studies, I think it's important for us to think about what Cather was trying to say about her place in Nebraska, or at least an imagined character's place in Nebraska. Okay, so so I just want you to be aware of these resources here. And then the other thing is, we have and I asked you to go through these explanatory notes, the historical essay, and then we also have, on a separate part of the state and a separate part of the Willa Cather universe, we have the Willa Cather Society, which is not necessarily based in UNL, although you're going to have a lot of professors and scholars from Lincoln, because that is the home of Willa Cather. That's where she went to school, and that's where the Cather Project is, and that's where these scholarly editions are done. She's our major writer. So you're going to have a lot of UNL and some other colleges in our region affiliation, but for the most part, the Willa Cather Society, much like the Mari Sandoz Society on our campus, they are a group that advocates for the author, puts on these conferences I've been talking about. They have the Willa Cather Center in Red Cloud, which is a wonderful facility. And they also put together quite a lot of extensive material. They have some of their own archives there that are different than the archives that are at UNL. So there's it's the same as it is with Sandoz. We have the same situation at Sandoz. So there's a large collection of materials at UNL Love Library on Sandoz, her primary materials, kept in the archives there. We have microfiche recordings of those same materials in our Mari Sandoz Center here on campus. And eventually we're hoping to have the whole thing, like I said, digitally archived. So these are important works that we do in the arena of literary scholarship. So we already looked at a biography at the Willa Cather Archive, but what about from the society? They have a little bit different take, short biography of the author, which might be useful to take a look at. It's kind of nice. It's the way it's divided up, and it's not a super long biography, but it has a lot of nice details. And I think it was written by Robert Thacker, who's a really nice guy, and I've met him at several conferences, and he's a Cather enthusiast and a very important scholar of Cather. The other thing that you can take a look at there is, this is something I really wanted to stress. Why did we choose A Lost Lady? Well, it's the sesquicentennial of Cather. So she was born 150 years ago in December of this year. So 2023 marks an important period of time in Cather, because it's 150 years and we have these sort of milestones, 100, 150, 125, you know, and so there's that. You can read through all this information about what they've been doing commemorating 150 years. You know, there was a sculpture of Willa Cather placed at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. There's been a lot of work done in Red Cloud on continuing restoration of the historic sites. And then they've had a series of these events, including the other thing that was being celebrated this year is the 100th anniversary of the awarding of the Pulitzer Prize for the novel One of Ours, which had been published a year previous. But it was awarded this important recognition in this year that was 100 years ago. And then it's the 100th anniversary of the publication of A Lost Lady and another collection of Willa Cather's poems. So it's very timely. And because last year they did a lot of events on One of Ours, because that's the 100th anniversary when it was published. That's a World War I novel. This novel, you know, I didn't know a lot about A Lost Lady before this summer. It's one of those books I'd never really picked up from Cather. At the various conferences I've been, and last year when they were talking about doing the events for this book, they mentioned that this is considered kind of a masterpiece. It's short. It is exploring some heavy themes, and a lot of people greatly admire this short novel. And so if you click on the link here for the spring conference, and I have the link included in my notes there, you'll notice that it did focus on this 150 years of Cather, and in particular, many of the sessions were focused on a lost lady. At the Spring International seminar in New York City that I attended a few weeks ago, people were also discussing a lost lady because, you know, it's the 100th anniversary, and it's just a book that's coming up a lot right now. So it's very timely for us to be reading this. Okay, so I wanted to point that out to you, that you're part of a movement here of celebrating 150 years of Willa Cather. And then the other thing is, at the Cather Society page, they have a nice collection of resources related to educational elements for readers, for teachers, for students, right? So you can take a look at some of these things. And if you look at for readers, you'll notice that there's these book club resources, right? So, and there is one for a lost lady. So I include the links here for this because we are doing our own book club as part of our final forum discussion of a lost lady. So these resources can be very useful to you. And then finally, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the novel in general. So one of the things we're going to be doing, so let me go back to our lesson. So once you complete this mini lesson on Willa Cather and the Lost Lady in the novel, once you kind of feel like you've got your novel stuff sorted out, I want you to go in and look at this assignment. And I've set this up so that this is our final regular assignment in the semester. And like I said, it carries over onto Monday, and you can complete this on your own schedule, except that the first part needs to be completed by midnight on Saturday. So just a couple days from now. Now you're going to see the first part is not super difficult. You should be able to do the first part. To be honestly, you should be able to do the first part, even if you haven't read the full assignment of part 1 of the novel. Then part 2, you respond to the questions from your classmates. So let me go ahead and just click on the assignment. So the assignment is set up in this way. It explains what a book club is, right? There are many examples of book clubs in our society, from Oprah Winfrey to Reese Witherspoon. It's a very popular thing. For some reason, it also seems to be a bit of a gendered thing. It's oftentimes associated with women, and it's oftentimes associated with older women who maybe are retired, maybe their lives have slowed down a little bit, and now they would love to gather every week or so and discuss books and force themselves to read and be more cultured. That's kind of the idea behind a book club. There were 2 movies that were based on this premise. I included the clips there, but book clubs and that idea of the book club meeting, it's in popular culture all over the place. So I'm sure you're familiar with book clubs. We're going to do our own book club in the guise of this forum, right? So the forum is set up, and like I mentioned, there's already some book club resources that you can look up on the internet, and you're welcome to utilize those. I want this to be a fun final assignment. It's a lot of work to read through a novel, but hopefully you're inspired or stirred or shocked by the events in the novel, and you can relate to them. And that's all we want to do, is we want to have a discussion about the novel like we're sitting in our living room and just having a nice chat. But without some sort of organization, I know that students will kind of struggle with this. So what I'm asking you to do is, for the first part of the novel, which again is maybe 100 pages, depending on your version of the book, I'd like you to think about dividing that up into thirds. So since there's 10 chapters in part 1 of the book, let's think the first 3 chapters, and then the next 3 chapters, and then the last 4 chapters. Those are maybe 3 distinct sections of the book. And what I'm asking you to do here, and those of you who've had classes with me before, you know I have students do these challenge questions. So I ask students to think from an inquiry perspective, questions that they have about the work, and then we use that to structure our discussion as a class. So if you're interested, you can click on this link here, and it shows you how to do what I call a challenge question. Now, a challenge question, when I have this as a regular assignment in my class, there's a description of how a question is structured so that it is open-ended enough that would be good for a book club discussion, for example. We don't want a question that's like, what year was a lost lady published? That's not the kind of, we're looking for questions as to why a certain character does something. You can point to a specific passage. You can point to a symbol. You can point to a moment. And remember, it doesn't have to, you don't have to cover the first 3 chapters, but you need at least some question that is relevant to those first 3 chapters. You see what I'm saying there? You don't have to have a question on each chapter or whatever. It could be in the first chapter. It could be in the 3rd chapter. I'm just saying roughly divide up the novel into 3 parts. The first part of the novel that we're reading, divide it into thirds and have some sort of question on each part. This is to make sure that everybody across the class has read the material and that we're asking questions from throughout the novel, okay? So you ask these questions, and there's some examples of a question. So if we look at a challenge question, might be something like this. Why does the story reunion emphasize the last time I saw my father, both the start and the end, right? Open-ended question, right? And that's it. That's it. You got to come up with 3 of these questions that will hopefully spark some discussion and post them by midnight on Saturday. You need to post them as soon as you can so that your classmates can respond to them for part 2. Okay. So if you have any questions on this, reach out to me. But that's basically how you do an effective question. And now I've stepped away from the discussion. I'll go back to it here. So that's part 1. Get those posted by the end of Saturday, right? Then you need to return to the forum. And before Monday, when we would normally have a new lesson, I would like you to then respond to at least 2 of your classmates' questions. And I want you to respond to get some of this coverage again. I want you to respond to 2 different sections of the novel and from 2 different classmates. So I'm hoping that we have enough participation. It's been a little bit tricky this summer, but if enough people post questions, then we should be able to have this book club type discussion. If you run into a situation where you're getting ready to respond and nobody is posting any questions, reach out to me and I will tell you what to do. So that's the second part of the forum. And there's some details in here about what you need to do to fully answer and respond to the question. We want to really get our juices flowing and think about the novel in these larger terms. You also want to think about the elements of fiction and the elements of literature that we've been discussing all semester, what we just learned about from the novel. All these things could be incorporated into the discussion. Then finally, after Monday, on Monday, you're supposed to read the final part of the novel. We're also trying to finish up the course by doing our final exam at the end of the week and the annotated bibliography, which is due at the end of next week as well, due on Thursday, actually. So for the last part of the discussion forum, hopefully you will have finished the novel by Monday and you can respond as soon as you can. But if not, you have until Thursday at noon, kind of our normal schedule, to post. Now, obviously, if you wait that long, it's going to creep into our final exam and other activities, but that's your prerogative. You can do whatever you want. You don't need to respond to each other for part 3. It asks you to think about a final sort of reaction or summary and just think we're in our book club where we have to, finish up for the night. We've drank all the wine, all that sort of stuff. It's time to go home, but we're going around the room and we're getting everybody's final impressions of the book, right? So that's the goal. That's the idea. And you should be able to respond to that. If you already completed the novel, go ahead and finish whatever parts of the forums that you want. Come back and respond to your classmates' questions. There are a lot of points available for this assignment. It's a big assignment. It's crossing 2 full lessons. It's a complete unit. It's a large read. There's a lot of moving parts. So this part is worth 55 points. There will be some factual elements from the novel on the final exam, character names and things like that. But for the most part, our discussion of the novel is taking place here. And that's basically it for that. Okay, so that's the goal there. And let me talk to you just briefly about some of the major themes in this novel that you might think about when you're getting ready to do your book club discussion. So just a couple of things. I won't go into too much detail here because I want you all to explore this novel on your own, but there is so much good information in the scholarly edition and the historical essay. You're going to be overwhelmed with information, as a matter of fact. But basically, if you look at a Wikipedia entry or anything online about a lost lady, what you're going to find out is, first of all, you should be aware that the main character, um, Marion Forrester, is the lost lady, right? And why is she lost? It's because she does some things that you're not supposed to do when you're married. Okay. I hope that's not too much of a spoiler. And you might think about in the novel how Cather deals with these issues, having an affair and things like that. How is she sensitive? How does she portray? Remember when we did the unit on love and desire? How does she think about that? How does she portray human sexuality? Cather's books can be quite sensual. It's interesting because we know that she probably was, from a gender perspective and a gender identity, she probably in our contemporary society, she might identify as a lesbian. And there's much made of the fact that she writes many of these books from the perspective of a male protagonist or a male perspective. In this case, we have Neil. And we might ask ourselves in this one if Neil is the protagonist or if Marion Forrester is the protagonist, the lost lady, so to speak. It's a technique that Cather uses a lot, but through this male protagonist or this male character, Neil, she is able to really describe the female characters in a way that's very sensual, and it's quite interesting from that regard. So that gets a lot of remarks on this novella. Also, there's a lot that is made of the fact that the lost lady starts out in a period, this woman, Marion Forrester, she starts out in a position of high society for rural Nebraska and Denver metropolitan area and Colorado, and this kind of, she's married into a railroad family. She's married into this, there's a lot of money in the railroad at this time. And in these communities, these were the people that were the prominent society members. So her husband, Captain Daniel Forrester, and all that we encounter in the first part of the novel, he is very highly established in this culture. People love to go to the house, all this sort of stuff. And what we see in the novel is this period of decline. So the novel shows us sort of the height, and maybe it's the height of Western settlement. You would use, settler colonialism, but it's at the height of this moment of homesteading. And after that, there's a kind of decline. These families decline. Certainly Captain Forrester's in decline. The house is in decline. All these wonderful things that were built up in this community is in decline. The trains aren't coming in as frequently to Red Cloud or to Sweetwater in the novel as they used to. And in this decline, as the Wikipedia article and many other places point out, there's kind of an association of the decline of the characters and their literal homesteads, the decline of the West as well after homesteading. And this is something that Cather kind of felt. The novel has a robust symbolic framework. Critical approaches have noted that the character of Marion Forrester symbolically embodies both the American dream as well as the gradual decline of the American West. So you might think about how there's that sort of technique. And I just wanted to share this as well. There were 2 film versions made of A Lost Lady, one in 1924, which was a silent film, and one in 1934, which I believe had audio. And you can see some few clips of these things, not the earlier film, but the later film with Barbara Stanwyck. You can see a little bit of this on the internet. There was a panel I attended in New York City where they looked at videos or film clips of Willa Cather. Very few. There's only like 10 seconds of film clip available of Willa Cather. And then some of these books that were published at the time to complement what was going on with the movie productions of these books. Cather hated these movie adaptations. She therefore never allowed Hollywood to use any of her other books. It's kind of a famous part of this story of A Lost Lady. You can read all about that in the historical essay in the scholarly edition, which you're going to encounter. It's kind of an interesting part of her time and her interactions and flirtations with Hollywood. Again, not to beat a dead horse, Sandoz had much the same experience. So I wanted you to be aware of that. And otherwise, there should be plenty of resources here for you to finish up the course effectively. Again, don't be shy. Reach out to me with any questions or concerns you have. Let's have a great final week of the course, and I'll see you all. I'll probably check in with another video on Monday, and I will see you then.